Have you ever had an expectation of something and then been left immensely disappointed or even angry at yourself or someone else when things didn't quite meet your expectations? You know, like the time when you had the interview and you really thought the job was yours and then it wasn't? Or when you didn't lose the 10 kilos which you expected to do easily before your birthday? You get the gist. Join me today as we chat about managing expectations, releasing expectations that don't serve you anymore, and grieving expectations that are unfulfilled. I'm the Forest Fairy. Welcome to my corner of the woods where I'm rebuilding, revamping, redesigning a magical life and hopefully inspire you to gather your own fairy dust. Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great week. September is supposed to be spring in the Southern Hemisphere. Although this is true for the rest of South Africa, this part of the country lags behind by a month or so in my opinion. However, we're blessed to have wild displays of one of my favorite flowers, the arum lily, at this time of the year, so my complaints about a late spring are few. As you've heard, today's conversation is all about expectations. Managing my expectations, releasing expectations, and the one that we sometimes tend to ignore, grieving my expectations. Spring or autumn, depending where in the world you are, and specifically its accompanying equinox, is an auspicious time to review our lives and pivot where we think appropriate. If you missed it, check out our previous conversation where I began the topic of pivoting by reframing the phrase starting over into a more graceful, positive pivoting. Later this month, I'll be chatting more about the equinox and what I'll be pivoting, but today I'll be sharing another pivoting precursor, expectations. Managing my expectations when I pivot, releasing impossible and irrelevant ones, and grieving the ones that were unfilled and unmet. The well-known Indian yogi and mystic Sadhguru once said that it's better to have no expectations than there'll be no rejections or unfilled expectations. He suggested that instead of spending time building fancy expectations of yourself, but to rather do what you can and just improve and stretch that. Now, I do in a way agree with that, but also not. I understand that focusing on the present and what is in your control is vital, but having no expectations feel like there's a nothingness ahead of me. Expectations should inspire and motivate me, and if they do disappoint, I should convert the feelings of, say, guilt, regret, and the actions of flogging myself into learnings and growth. But sometimes the theory sounds much easier than it actually is. So I have two tactics, so to speak, that I use to manage my expectations. The first is to ensure that my expectations are authentic. In other words, expectations that are true to me and thus more achievable. This also aligns with an earlier conversation where we spoke about identity shift, and I shared how we should rather first change our inner state and upgrade our self-image, and then our world shifts to accommodate the change. I'll never be a tall, lean, leggy 40-year-old. But an authentic expectation of this self-image upgrade is rather a healthy, muscular, 60-something woman with an appropriate BMI. Oh yes, and short, that's a given. This expectation or goal, as it were, is more achievable if my daily intention and choices are aligned. Things that I can focus on, as the Sadhguru says. And disappointment will be caused more by me and my actions or non-actions than by an unrealistic expectation. The second tactic is not tying my self-worth or self-esteem to a future or a better me. I cannot believe I'll only be valued, worthy, loved, successful, or whatever, only if I've achieved a certain desire, expectation, or goal. But whether you're shifting your whole identity or just pivoting on a few key aspects of your life this equinox, it's important to also review your old expectation and identity shifts. Do they still serve and honor your authentic self? An expectation that I had to release was the idea that I would be building a beautiful little cottage for myself in this village. With the sale of my piece of ground, I'm letting go of the lifestyle I created in my mind and thus the expectation I had. Clinging to this was detrimental, and I had to reframe it as the one possibility of living here, shifting into countless possibilities of living anywhere in the world. Do you have expectations that need to be binned? Please share in the comments below what you've realized doesn't serve you. And then there is the more painful but necessary one, the grieving of some of my unmet and unfulfilled expectations. Sometimes expectations are unmet and unfulfilled through no fault of ours. Things outside our sphere of control just spun them either out of reach or into another galaxy, never to be seen again. Our family always loved, and still do, the bushveld and lowveld areas of South Africa, which houses many of our game parks. We love nature, and the diversity of flora and fauna in these areas is unprecedented. So one of the expectations was that we would retire in the lowveld, and our children and grandchildren would love to visit us, and we would be able to take them elephant, lion, and hippo sightseeing. The mere fact that I am now single, in my 60s, and living in the Overberg is testament to this expectation being unfulfilled. And while I live in one of the most beautiful areas in the world and have a happy life, I grieve the life I thought I would have, my expectation of what things would have looked like in my 60s. And depending on the expectation, this grief takes a while to resolve or occasionally just pops up unexpectedly. And that's okay. We must allow ourselves to grieve our unfulfilled expectations. Whether it's an unfulfilled expectation of a long and happy marriage to a particular person, or of achieving much more in our careers, or of being financially secure. Whatever is that deep, unfulfilled expectation, take the time to consider it without getting into the blame and shame game, and then allow yourself to grieve. It's cleansing. So there you have it. The 3 aspects around expectations that I consider before I start planning any pivoting: managing, releasing, and grieving. If you enjoyed this conversation, keep a lookout for more on what I intend to pivot this spring, or join me in the conversation starting over how I rather pivot on the serious and small stuff. Wishing you a week filled with wonderful expectations and sprinklings of fairy dust. Until next time, goodbye